Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Over the Cap podcast. This is Jason Fitzgerald. You can find me on X at Jason_OTC, or you can email me, jason at overthecap.com. I'm joined once again by Nellie the Bunny. Nellie's got that treat going, so she'll be good for probably about 5 or 10 minutes, and then, I don't know, start hopping around and looking for something else. Um, this one is going to be a little bit of a challenge tonight, I think. We're going to see how the voice holds up. I'm just not really sick, but just very hoarse. It's been like this for a little while. Just, I don't know. I think it's the change in weather. Just kind of wiped me out a little bit here. Feel good. I feel fine, but it makes it tough to talk every now and then. So no beer of the night tonight because I figured that would probably definitely wipe me out. So we'll be sticking with water, something like that, during the course of the evening. We'll see what we can get through and see how my voice holds up. Still haven't fixed the microphone issues. I just didn't get around to it this week. So still trying the same thing. We're going to try it with video on here too. So we'll see how this one holds up. And I think next week I should have the regular audio system kind of back in place. So I think tonight, mainly what I just really wanted to do was do a whole thing on Russell Wilson's contract. Denver is obviously struggling this year. And it does kind of have that feel right now that Wilson, fairly or unfairly, is probably going to get almost all the blame for what's going on in Denver. You do kind of get that feeling like the coach is already out on him, that there's a disconnect there. Now, I haven't watched him that much. There's people that would say differently. Nick, I think, believes differently on that one. And certainly has said, let more games play out with Wilson before you start to jump to conclusions on stuff. But having watched them now the last 2 weeks, the game against the Jets and then just now against the Chiefs, Peyton's reactions at times to Wilson remind me a little bit of Bill Parcells 25, 30 years, going way back. But when Parcells took over the Jets and Neil O'Donnell was the quarterback on the team, and Parcells had no real desire to have him as his quarterback. And you almost felt like there were times when he was doing stuff that maybe wasn't in the best short-term interest of the Jets for that particular season, but was more along the lines of like, I just want to speed up this divorce from him. I don't want that to be a thing to where next year we have to deal with, is he our quarterback or is he not our quarterback? I'd rather go out there with Glenn Foley or, be able to sign my Vinny Testaverde or whoever it might be. I kind of get that same feeling right now. Like he's not all in on Wilson. Like he thought that he could do something with him, and it's just not there. So I think at this point, if you're Denver, you have to seriously begin to discuss exit strategies from this contract. And it's not an easy one, but there's always options in most NFL contracts. I mean, with the exception of first round draft picks where the entire contract is guaranteed and the Deshaun Watson contract where the full deal is guaranteed, there's always wiggle room in contracts. And I think that one of the negatives with even just the websites like mine here with OTC, you get caught up sometimes in these numbers on a chart. And I've seen this a lot this week, where you hear this like, okay, his cap number next year is 35.4 million, his dead money is 85 million. Broncos are stuck. And that's about as deep as the analysis goes. There's 85 million dead, they're stuck. And then you'll get to the next year and there's this much dead that year. You know what, they're stuck. Really, their out year in this is 2026. Like that's when it starts to become reasonable to get out from the contract. And you have to kind of get into the different options that you have with deals, different options that you have with the way that you can move money around within the NFL rules, different ways that you can modify contracts. And you got to take all of that into account, and then you can kind of try to map out strategies for what you can do with your cap management of a contract that's just gone totally sideways, for whatever reasons. If you want to look at it. So let's just take a look here. I just pulled these up in Excel so we can run through a couple different things. So we'll run them through here. So this is the base look at Wilson's contract here. So we've got 2023. There's no point in really changing that. Some have there. There's no real point in changing the 2023 one. I think there's no one they're going to trade him to this year. I would imagine that that's a really out there possibility. And, I can't picture somebody doing it. But before we get into it, the things that you have to understand with his contract are the dates that are involved and what that does with the dead money in the contract. And we'll walk through these here. So 5th day of the league year in 2024, he'll have his entire 2025 salary guaranteed. So at the moment, his 2023 base is guaranteed. He already got paid this bonus. In 2024, he has $39 million that's guaranteed this year. It's a $17 million paragraph 5 salary. His base salary for the year is 17. He has an option bonus that's guaranteed at $22 million. That could be paid out all his base salary. It doesn't have to be paid as an option. It's just for salary cap purposes. It's usually a little bit better for the team to pick up the option versus, not doing that. But if he's on that roster on the 5th day of the league year next year, so March 19th maybe, I forget what the first day of the league year is next year, but it's going to be right around March 17th, March 19th, something like that. This number here that's in yellow, which I kind of used to mean a partial guarantee, or an injury guarantee in this case, this number here will become fully guaranteed. So if you're keeping him on the roster in 2024, you're really opting in to put him on the roster in 2025 as well, because now you're opting into this salary of $37 million, which doesn't really make much sense, but we'll take a look at that in a minute. On the 5th day of the league year in 2025, he'll have $4 million of his 2026 salary fully guaranteed. So right now, in this $40 million that's yellow, $4 million is currently injury protected. That'll become fully guaranteed in 2026. He'll also earn an additional $5 million of injury protection in 2026. So that'll be protected too. If he happens to be on the roster 5th day of 2026, then his entire 2026 salary is fully guaranteed. You run some risks there. But the big one is this 5th day of the league year in 2024, which causes the 2025 salary to become fully guaranteed. So if you're watching along here, I'll just highlight that one. Let me just highlight that. Whoops. I'll just highlight that in blue. So, what this tells me is I need to make certain that I could cut him by the 5th day of the league year in 2024. Just so you're aware, that's also, I believe, the final day that they can exercise the option. I think the option window for them is the 1st day through the 5th day of the league year. And again, that's just an accounting thing because that money at the moment is guaranteed in 2024. But here's the issue for them. And this is the issue that he has to understand as well. And something that I would imagine the Broncos are going to bring up to him. If they aren't already, it'll certainly be at their bye week, which I think is 2 games from now. I think it's their bye. Right now, if Wilson was to sustain any kind of significant injury, an Achilles tear, ACL, anything that has months and months and months of rehab, that basically would block the Denver Broncos from being able to release him to avoid that guarantee kicking in. Because, in that case, what happens is you're really cutting the player when he's hurt. So at that point in time, the injury guarantee on the contract typically kicks in. And you can't avoid that, that vesting date by cutting the injured player. So with that kind of looming over you, you have to have that consideration like, okay, we're not going to play him because he may earn a guarantee that we just don't even want him to earn. And this has happened before. Some people want to say that this is like this is something that's never occurred before, but it has. RG3, Robert Griffin, they had opted into his 5th year, and Washington was petrified that if they put him on the field, he'd get hurt and they'd owe him $20 million or whatever the salary was. And they didn't just not play him, they didn't even practice him. They put him on like the practice team, basically. It was basically scout team, playing safety and stuff like that. Colin Kaepernick got benched initially because of his contract. His contract had millions upon millions upon millions of injury protection, but nothing that was really fully guaranteed. So they benched him. It was wrapped up as saying, well, the other guy's playing okay, and performance-related stuff, and they just benched him because they were afraid of the contract. And what ended up happening in all of these situations, or not in all of them, but in Kaepernick's situation, is you go to the player, and at some point you're just like, look, here's your option. Your option is to sit on the bench, collect your paycheck, and then we're going to cut you when it's reasonable for us to cut you, all right, to avoid that future guarantee from kicking in. And you can collect the check. It's a retirement check. Is this the way you want to end your career? Or you can waive your guarantees that you have in the future, and we'll put you back on the field tomorrow as the starting quarterback. And that's exactly what happened with Kaepernick. That's also sort of what happened with Tyrod Taylor. He was another player where they did not like the structure of an extension. So they ended up redoing his contract to where they got rid of any of those future guarantees from kicking in, and he was able to keep his job for one more season as the starting quarterback of the Buffalo Bills. So, from a realistic standpoint, Denver at some point, probably pretty soon, has to have this discussion with him that basically says this $37 million yellow that you see here has to go away. Like, it can't stay there if you want to have an opportunity to play. It can't stay there even if you're willing to waive a no-trade clause and say, we'll trade you to another team. Because they're not going to want to pick up that salary. At least I don't think they would. And we'll talk about that option in a minute, too. The $40 million, that's not injury protected. That's just a $4 million number, which is a lot, obviously. But that's all the kind of stuff that you have to do, that you have to waive away. So the negatives here, when you start talking about, well, let's not get rid of him in 2025. Let's not terminate the contract. Why? Well, because this $85 million cap number is really scary. All right? It's just too much for us. But look at your options. If you cut him in 2024, you're going to spend $85 million, all right, on your cap. Now, you might get a credit if he signs with another team, which is a possibility. You get an offset on it, on the salary that you pay him. So depending on what that is, you might get a little bit off, but I don't think that would be too much. You're talking about $85 million. The next 3 years, just as a reference, I'm going to guess that the cap would be somewhere in this. You got the new TV deal, and I still think the cap is artificially deflated because of COVID. So you basically spend about, your next 3 years, 10% of that overall cap that you have would just be spent on dead money for Wilson. Not a good number. Obviously, that's not, but right, it's sunk cost. What if we don't cut him in 2024 because of this $85 million? Well, now we got to go all the way to 2025 where we let his salary vest. So he's got the $37 million in there that's guaranteed, right? So if we do that, now our total cap that's spent is $122 million. That's 14.6% of our salary cap just so we could avoid the initial $85 million dead money charge. And what if, well, that number was too high in 2025. It was too high in 24. It's obviously too high in 25. So now we got to go all the way to 26. So he plays for the team in 24. He plays for the team in 25. He's still got a $4 million full guarantee at that point. So, now we're going to cut him, and we're spending 15% of the cap over a course of 3 years on the one player. So you end up in a better position overall, even if the pain is a little bit more short term, if you release him in 2024. The dead money, and that's the other thing when people look at these numbers and you go, well, it makes more sense to release him in 2025 because, on OTC it says it's 49.6 million dead. Yeah, that number is there as a snapshot in time. That number isn't accurate for what happens when that salary guarantee kicks in. When that salary guarantee kicks in, his dead money goes from that number that you see there to 86.6 million. So by opting into 2025, we're making the dead money situation the next year worse. So keeping him beyond this season, unless you're really truly committed to him and you think that there's a change that can occur, you have to cut him and take the 85 million. It's just in the best interest of the team, just to plan it out that way and then figure out how we're going to count for it on the cap in one season, 2 seasons, however you spread it all out. So, I just broke down a couple of different ways that they can approach this. And sometimes deals that have option bonuses in them can be a little bit more complicated. And I'm not 100% sure, to be honest, how some of that stuff works. I believe even if you exercise the option, I think that you're still allowed to designate a player a June 1 cut. If I'm wrong about that, what you would do is you would get down to a different approach, which I'll talk about here, which is prepaying the year before. But the ways that you can do this to kind of minimize the cap hit. All right, so let's say you kept the contract as is, you exercise the option, you're still allowed to do the June 1. You'd have dead money next year of $35.4 million, which is the exact number of his current salary cap figure. And then in 2025, you would have $49.6 million in dead money, which would be a savings of, let me just see, not a lot, but it would be a little bit of savings. A savings of $5.8 million on your where his current 2025 salary cap is right now. So even though those numbers look giant, your team is not impacted at all in 2024. You're still in the same cap position you were before. You're in a slightly better salary cap position in 2025, and then he's completely off the books in 2026. And for a team like Denver, which is going to go into a rebuilding phase here, I think, and probably have a young quarterback on the team in 24, even though we're talking about a $49.6 million in dead money that year, and you go, that's so high. Your cost if you have a rookie quarterback, even if the player's in his second year, your total spend on that position is still low, right? 2024 number, you've got him on his rookie salary and 35.4 for Wilson. 49.6 plus a rookie salary. That's still not bad. It's not great, but it's not terrible. Because remember, our cap numbers for a lot of our players are creeping up higher and higher and higher. So your spend on that position, since you're going in there with a rookie quarterback, kind of offsets the impact of this contract. And then you get to 2026, and now you're ready to roll, because you've got Wilson completely off the books. You've still got your quarterback on a young, a low money contract. And that gives you 2 years you can probably work with to try to maximize your potential if you're Denver. And there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, would you want to have a longer window of cap flexibility with the young players? Sure. But you're not in that position. So you want to look back at teams like Dallas, who got out of cap troubles in large part because they had Dak Prescott, which allowed them to cut Tony Romo. You look at examples like that, and you see the way that teams have utilized some of those rookie contracts to combat salary cap problems. Now, if you renounce the option, here you can just kind of go scorched earth in 2024. So in 2024, you can increase his cap number to $53 million, all right, which would be a loss in this case of $17.6 million in cap room, all right. Just got to take all your lumps next year, and that's the way a lot of teams operate in the NFL, right? You just take a year and you say, every veteran on our team is gone. Now, Denver does not have a great cap position next year. Right now, I have them at about $25 million over. That's better than where they were a little bit ago because they've started to move a couple players off the team. So it's a little bit of a better spot. And obviously, they can move some numbers around. I'm sure that, if you're willing to take that kind of season, you can do that. And then in 2025, under that scenario, you only have to account for $32 million in dead money. So now, where we've completely taken our lumps in 24, we're in a better position in 2025, if you want to look at it that way, to be able to surround a young quarterback with some free agents, and some talented players. What if we wanted to use our cap space in 2023? You could do that as well. Here, what you would do is you'd prepay a portion of his salary. In this case, I was saying you would just take the option bonus and pay it at the end of 2023. I'm assuming in that kind of scenario that would be if you're not allowed to use the post-June 1 after you exercise an option. The way the post-June 1 designation works is if you renegotiate a player contract after the end of the regular season, you're not allowed to use the post-June 1 designation. You'd actually have to carry the player till June, which you can't do if Wilson insists on keeping this vesting guarantee for 2025. So in that case, you would they have the right to convert whatever they need to a signing bonus. They don't have to ask them for that. You would do that at the end of the year. You would convert that salary. So you'd lose $4.4 million in cap space. That's okay. They have the room to do that right now. I have them with about $9 million in cap room. Might be a little bit higher than that. So they'd be able to take $4.4 million that normally they'd just be carrying over anyway. You just take it as a hit this year. That'd leave you 35.4 dead next year on the cap, and you'd have 45.2 in 2025. So slightly different than the keeping as is option. Your other option is you could prepay most of his salary in 2024. I have a little computer malfunction here. Let's see if I can fix this. You can keep most of his salary there. Just pop off for a second. Let me just see if I can fix this. Let's see if that worked. Let's see. All right, I think that worked. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. You can, it's a slightly different way to take those charges. It's kind of an in-between, at that point. Prepaying most in 2023, this is where we just say, all right, you know what? Of this $39 million we owe him, we're going to basically pay him, $35 million of it right now. We'll take a $7 million cap charge in 2023, so we're going to lose $7 million of carryover. We'll take 25 dead in 2024, so our net change is going to be $32 million in 2024, so slightly better than the other ones, and we're going to defer a little bit more to 2025 when we expect the salary cap to be higher, and our dead money at that point in time would be $53 million. Is what we would owe on the cap. So in every scenario, if I did these right, I probably should have checked them. It should add up to 85. Let's see. Let's see if I screwed anything up. 85, 85, 85, 85. There you go. Look at that. So those are your legitimate options. And the salary cap numbers of 35.4 million and even 50 million, it's not awful. 35.4 and 45.2, 25 and 53. I mean, these are workable. They're not so much that you just can't do them at all, especially when you realize his cap number next year is 35.4 anyway, and then the following year it would be almost $56 million. So you're going to spend $56 million in cap space in 2025 on him, even if he's on the team. So it doesn't really make a difference. When you're just looking at these just from a positional standpoint. Now, your other things are, what are different ways that you can modify this deal? So, these are some pretty basic things, that you could do here. So the first thing that I really wanted to do was, you need to paint a picture to him when you're going to go to someone and you're going to modify a contract. And, they did that with, I think, Frank Clark this week, where they got him to basically take a pay cut to probably ensure his release. That signing was a signing that made no sense for them at all. But, whatever, is what it is. But the thing you want to look at is the market for players. Now, Wilson at this point in time, the let Russ cook narrative, all that stuff is gone, right? The talks that we had where you're talking about Seattle doing him wrong, I think everybody owes the people in Seattle probably an apology for maybe some of the stuff. They see very close how things go, and maybe they knew Russ cooking was not a real thing. And certainly he was at a point where maybe he was going to start to break down. And, you look at Wilson's numbers here. I'll just pull them up from Pro Football Reference. You got a terrific career. All right, you got all these, if you're looking at the screen here, you got all these Pro Bowls. But Wilson is 35 years old right now, and he looks like an old 35. And, that's, I always would say that the age that quarterbacks break down traditionally is this 33, 34, 35. That's when you really start to see a lot of changes. And, we get, I think we get caught up in the Tom Brady's of the world, and you just expect those players everyone to fit the mold of Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers and, going back a generation of Brett Favre. And it's like, that's a rarity. Most guys, you see them in their mid-30s, the arm starts to go, the athleticism starts to go, you start to get nicked up, banged up a little bit more. And, you look at Wilson's numbers here, his team records, 6-8, 4-11, 1-5. Just even if we're looking at on a yards per game basis, in 2015 he was at 251, 263, 250. Drops down to 215, back up to 257, 263, 223, 234, 217. That's a bit of an alarming trend. You got multiple coaches. You can blame whatever you want on the coach the year before. It's a new coach this year. And, he's playing better than he played last year, I think, at least the little bits that I've seen. Maybe not counting the Chiefs game. But he's still not a really high-level quarterback, not a viable quarterback. I think that you would look at and say, yeah, he's the missing piece. I don't think you would say that anymore about him, and you're going to have some kind of concerns. And this year we did see, a little bit of a mid-tier market that began to develop. And you saw Derek Carr. So Derek Carr will make $30 million in the first year of his contract, $60 million by the end of year 2. Those are fully guaranteed. $100 million by the end of year 3. That's injury guaranteed. That $100 million. Jimmy Garoppolo, 24.25, 48.5, and then 72.75. Geno Smith, incentive-laden deal, 27.5, then $50 million, and then $75 million over 3. Garoppolo and Smith just got their first year guaranteed, I believe, on them, 27.5 and 24.25. They got injury protection on the second years of their deal, so about $50 million. Garoppolo's has some per game stuff in there, so it's a little bit less, but we'll just consider it in there as, salary that they're hoping to kind of pay him out. So the average player in this mid-tier market is 27.25 million in year one salary, about 53 million through 2 years, 82 million, 83 million through 3. And you can argue like he belongs closer to Garoppolo and Geno Smith than Derek Carr. That Derek Carr contract was a mistake. Saints are regretting it and everything else. You know, the Carr and Garoppolo contracts probably work against Wilson in this case. But, you look at Wilson's salary at the moment, on his current contract, if you were to trade into it, $39 million. So that's about $12 million over market. 76 million through 2, that's about 23 over the market, and then 116 through 3, and that's 33 over the market. And again, this is why this is untradeable, because if you trade it, you're opting into the guarantee in 2024 and 2025. So you've got 76 guaranteed in a market where only Derek Carr got a guarantee in that year 2 of 60. So you might be able to argue that you can guarantee 39 and you can injury protect with a normal vesting date, the next year, even the next 2 years, but not just guaranteed at signing. There's no team that would take that deal. And that, again, that's something that if he's unhappy in Denver, that's something that you bring up to him, and you got to understand, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to end your career just sitting here on the bench on a one-win team and maybe have that being the end of your career, limp into free agency next year, or whenever, and just end up in a bad position? And the other thing too, when it comes to free agency, and you might be willing to do something in free agency. You look at next year, and not that there's ever a great group of players, but Kirk Cousins is going to be a free agent next year. Kirk Cousins is same age, basically. He's a little bit older, I think. He'll be 36 next year. He's 36 this year. But is playing at a higher level than Wilson is. So I think teams would jump on Cousins before they would jump at Wilson. I think Tannehill would probably be behind Wilson, but I'm not even sure on that. So it's not like you're even guaranteed of being the top free agent available. You're going to have the stink of being cut, the stink of being benched. And on top of that, if you're not willing to waive anything in your contract, with the offsets that are in there, if the Denver Broncos are paying you $39 million, what do you think another team is going to offer you? So you're going to have, it's the same thing. You're going to earn, $1.2 million from some team, but do you want to be on a contract that says Russell Wilson average per year $1.21 million? I don't think you'd want that. I think that would actually be kind of embarrassing. But if you waive that guarantee, it's things get a little different. The injury thing, then at least it leaves you maybe some options, to move the contract or to work with Denver if, if I'm completely wrong about the way the coach thinks on it, about things you can do. So, here are some options. So if you wanted to bring the contract to reasonable numbers, I think you'd have to eat $25 million. That's a lot. And if you did that, so I have a column listed here. I just changed option bonus to renegotiation bonus. So you would have to take a dead money charge if you're the Broncos of $71 million next year. A team that acquires him would take on $14 million, then $37, then $40, $45, and $50. But you wouldn't have any of that stuff, guaranteed really at signing. So, you would get that 2025 guarantee that's in there. So, because you'd be keeping the contract as is. I forgot about that part. So they'd be on the hook for $51 million. I think teams would look at that and say, okay, that's in line with Garoppolo. That's in line with Geno Smith. We can give it a shot for 2 years. If you find a team that's desperate enough, to take one shot with Wilson and, use that cap space for 2 seasons. The $71 million dead money, I think, would be too high, in my opinion, for them. The other thing that you can do to approach that just from a different perspective is say, the contract is $25 million too high. If you're going to take on that extra $25 million for us, what do we have to give you? And you could come up with different things. One of the things that I mentioned on Twitter was, would Surtain, could you do a trade with him involved? You put him in there in a package with Wilson, and maybe you get a lower pick back than you would normally get for, a good corner, a decent corner, and because I don't know what his market value would be. Or is this one of those things like a Brock Osweiler thing? $25 million, that's worth a second round pick. We'll give you a second rounder, you give us a 7, and we'll give you Wilson. Maybe. You take a bad team that's got a lot of cap space. Maybe they're willing to do something like that. I don't know. Another option, you can modify contract to market. This would be a scenario where you keep him on the team. $39 million, fully guaranteed. Guaranteed $12 million for injury. So in this case, you'd be modifying his deal. You'd pay him $25 million base salary next year. That'd be guaranteed. You'd have a $27 million base salary in 2025. You'd have $12 million of that would be full, I think. Would that get him at 14, I guess, would be full. I think I have my numbers wrong here. Let me just see what I did, because you owe him 39. So it'd be 14. I don't know why I have a 12 million injury. Probably should have been 13 injury. Anyway, well, whatever. It's something similar to that. All right, you're basically going to give him an option to where he'll definitely earn 39 and could earn a little more. So, his salary cap number, if you don't pay any of it as a bonus, would be 39 million and 41 million in 24 and 25. Dead money would be 44 million in 2025. And you'd definitely have him on the roster in 2024. You might even have him on the roster in 2025, and your dead money in 2026 would be 18 million at that point. So that's one of those things where you're opting into him, but you're opting into him at a more reasonable level. And again, because he knows this is what the market is, this is probably a better deal than he would find anywhere else, and he still keeps his 39 million, but with a contract like this. What if you reduce the contract length? So here's another option that gives him free agency in 2025 if he's willing to waive his option, waive that guarantee. So he'd keep his contract as is. So it's got the $35.4 million cap hit. But what you're going to do here is you're going to take a page out of the Eagles book. You're going to put in a base salary at the minimum of 2025 of $1.25 million. Then a couple years down the line in the contract, I did in 2028, I threw in a dummy salary of $200 million. And the way this would work is if he's on the roster, second day of the 2025 league year, $200 million becomes guaranteed. So it's just there to ensure that the player is cut. So what that allows you to do is have Wilson as your potential starter next year. Probably either in front of a rookie or behind a rookie at some point in time. He would still earn his same $39 million, but you'd be able to account for it now. $39 million, 35.4 on the salary cap. And then in 2025, you June 1 him, you only have an $18.4 million cap hit in 2025 and a $31.2 million cap hit in 2026. So that would be a different way that you can kind of restructure, all that money and it adds up to 85 million. So it lets you take that 85 million dead and now spread it over 3 years. Just by being creative with him and with the contract, and giving him a chance at least to hold a job and be completely free and clear in 2025 if he wants to keep playing, to have an opportunity to go somewhere else. Another option would be if you can get a team to trade for him. This would be the Aaron Rodgers type of contract restructure. This is where you just say, new team deals with the contract. So you put a huge salary in 2025. I put in a $76 million salary. About 37 and change of that would be fully guaranteed. You'd have a minimum salary in 2024 of 1.2 million. That'd be fully guaranteed. You would trade him over, and you'd have to take on $46 million in dead money, which would not be horrendous, by any stretch. You would take down a lot of cap room at first from where you're at, so you'd be able to handle it, with your cap. The team that acquires him would only need 1.2 million in cap space at the time of trade, and then they would go in there, even though it's got a $76 million cap hit in 2025. They would go in there, and you would modify that contract as you see fit to spread that $39 million and whatever else you're going to pay him, around over the next 2 or 3 years. So, these are just some different ways that you can deal with a contract like this, and, that you can kind of move off of the player. And there's ways that it could be harsh, and there's ways that, you could probably get something that's a little bit more of an amicable split between the two sides. But I think the number one issue is you've got to get the player to waive that injury guarantee that's going to vest this March. It's like, if that doesn't go away, then you're just in a really hard, really tough position. Now, I don't think I didn't put it in here. You could try to do the same trick, and give him free agency next year. But given that you owe him 39 and that's full, I don't think that there would be a scenario where he would go for that, because I don't think that they can look at the market and they can say the grass is definitely greener if we get out of here. Now, Wilson's made a lot of money in his career. Maybe you would be that desperate to leave, to where essentially you could do a buyout. You might be able to do something like that if you were, Denver. A buyout, that would be something where you would probably have to go in there and pay him something this year, whatever that would be. I don't know, how much of a buyout would you want to do? 20 million, maybe. Basically split it. Let's see. So if you did a buyout on it, let's put this as option 2. Let me get rid of this. So if we did that, his cap would jump up by $4 million this year. Next year, you would put in a base salary of 121. That would be a dummy salary, all right? And you would have a that same $200 million I mentioned before in 2028. You'd have that in there as just trying to get somebody to take that. So you'd lose $4 million this year. But what you would do in this scenario, this might be somewhat interesting. As a June 1, and I'm going to make sure, I don't know if my auto calculations are working right here, so let me just redo them. So as a June 1, you would carry him on the cap at 19.2 million. That number would then fall to 18 million for the year. Then the next year, you would have to account for $44 million. That would actually be kind of interesting. Again, I don't know if that's something he would go for, but that would be kind of interesting if you said, okay, look, we'll get rid of the offset. We'll just pay you $20 million this year, an extra 20 over what we've already got. But we want this to be a contract that we can June 1 next year. And, basically you would be taking, the 22 million and the 44. So you'd end up with about 66 million, I guess you'd be paying dead total, over 2 years. And, that's not too bad. That's better. You're saving yourself 19 million or so. I think that's what I cut his stuff by, 19. That'd be an interesting scenario if they would be willing to do that. Take 20 now, give up your other 19 in guarantees, and that makes you free and clear to negotiate with another team. So the other team's not like, well, you're making 40 from, the Broncos, so we're not going to pay you anything. You might be able to go, and if you got that Garoppolo deal, or if you get the Geno Smith deal, you would make out better because you've got 39 million right now that would be coming to you under your current contract. If you got them to pay you 20, then you got another team to pay you 25, you'd be at 45. I think that'd be interesting. That would probably take a lot of convincing, to do something like that. And that's probably something that would have to be done at the end of the year. And I think you'd have to bench him before that. Unless you had this discussion beforehand, like, let him finish the season as a starter, you pay us this money now, and we'll modify the contract this way. That would be kind of interesting, as a way to do it. I'm not saying they would do it, but it just might be interesting, as just a possibility. Now, the other thing, where people talk about, like, trades, like in baseball, you see trades sometimes, like a bad contract for a bad contract. It's hard to do in the NFL. I do think it'd be intriguing if Cleveland called up and said, we'll take Wilson, you take Watson. Watson is a longer term headache because that salary is already fully guaranteed. The Wilson stuff, especially if you modified it, that might be more of a short-term pain kind of thing, where you put him on the team as try and plug in where you got a terrific defense, hope he's healthy and can play, whereas you don't have to deal with Watson and whatever the stuff is that goes on there and the stigma that comes with it. I'm not saying Denver would want him. It's the only contract in the league that would be equivalent as a problem for a problem, even though they're very different. But, the Wilson contract, when we talk about it being terrible, again, yeah, it's bad. And in hindsight, all that stuff is bad. They waited on doing the extension. That price probably drove up that way, because of the delay that was in there and everything else. But, it is only next year that's guaranteed on it. So it's not like something that has implications 2-3 years down the line, which is what Watson's has, or what a contract might have been like that would have been signed this year with a player who was really bad. So there's degrees of how bad a deal is, and this one's not great, but it's not as bad as that. So that's why I just said, like, that might be a deal that someone would look at and say, yeah, no, you could do something like that. I don't think Arizona would be interested. Now, Wilson does have a no trade clause. I'm just assuming that he would waive it to get out from whatever this is, because it's really not a good situation for either of them, either side. Sorry, but I think there's options that they have here, but don't just look at a chart and say 85 million bucks. He can't go anywhere. 85 dead. He can't go anywhere. There are ways to manipulate those numbers, um, different ways to account for it, to where you clearly can release him and deal with it on your cap. But there clearly is a middle ground that I think he can come to an agreement with Denver on. To just where you just have the realism of it. Like, okay, the max you're going to earn is 39 million. That's the maximum possible amount of money that you can earn next year is $39 million. And you can earn that money sitting on the bench. You can, the rest of this year, and then you can see what's out there and play on a contract that's worth nothing, and have another team try to deal with whatever with you, or we can try to come up with some ways to keep you here for 2 years, or at least just keep you here for the rest of this year, um, playing, and then just letting things go. So I think this is one, and I don't know how this will be, because I know through the years, um, Wilson's represented more baseball side kind of stuff. There's always been some weirdness, I think, of things that get thrown out there, with contract expectations and everything else. Um, but and that's not probably having that relationship as much as other agents do throughout the league, that represent like tons and tons and tons of players. And, that makes it easier sometimes to manipulate stuff, to work with them on that. But I think there's definitely a path here that the two sides can kind of work together and come up with some ways to kind of make this reasonable to both, to where he can probably have a better end to his career, and the Broncos can gain some flexibility and just kind of move on to, the next phase of what they want to do. And, even if he was to stick around for 2 years, 3 years, or whatever, and you brought these numbers down to market, like a Garoppolo contract, I think if you do that, I think a lot of the negativity disappears. The numbers, the salaries and contracts, they really increase the expectation level for players. And when players disappoint and they have a high annual value on their contract, and you see cap numbers sometimes that are pretty outrageous, they become like the target of all the criticism. When you bring those numbers down, that does begin to vanish. It kind of moves away. The player still obviously is a problem if he can't play very well, but it doesn't become like the main talking point all the time, when dealing with a player. All right, let me take a look here at questions. Let me go to the emails first. And let's see what we have here. Okay, so Mike has a question here. Jalen Hurts has 7 void years. 3 of the 7 void years have no cap assigned. What is the purpose of the additional 3 years? Hurts has a max of 4 seasons. The cap can be assigned to. All right, let me pull up Jalen Hurts' deal. There's Jalen Hurts on here. All right, let's pull up his contract. Okay. All right. So what he's talking about here is that, he has options throughout his contract, and you can only prorate up to 5 years. So why do we have additional void years when there's nothing in the years of this contract, um, that you could push into these additional years? And the reason for these additional years really has to do with, salary cap stuff. So there's certain rules. So number one, this goes beyond the scope of the current CBA. Um, so even though these years all say void, they actually do carry salaries in there, and the salaries have to fit with certain rules, and the salaries need to be in place. Um, if you extend him at some point in time, the way that these rules work with these renegotiations, um, basically you can't increase the salary that you're going to pay to a player. Um, if it's a year after the most recent renegotiation, and sometimes for the purposes of that, they'll consider exercising an option as a renegotiation. Not 100% certain on that. It used to be that way. Not 100% certain on that anymore. But you know, you want to have these years here. So basically, at any point in time, they can go into the contract in 2027, 2028, whatever year it might be. That they can go into that contract and they could say, okay, we're going to extend the term of your contract, and we want to extend it to say 2035 by having these years here with these inflated salaries and stuff. That gives them the option to be able to do those kind of things within the current framework of the rules that govern contract extensions, um, and the way that you can kind of manipulate the numbers with that. The other thing is your options that you pick up actually have to have like something attached to them, right? So, the Eagles have an option in say 2027, and that's probably to pick up the 2034 league year on the contract. You say, well, okay, that's silly. Why not just pick up 2032? Um, you've got all these options and you're picking up something. The reason is that the Eagles might, at some point in time, too, they might decide they don't want to exercise the option. Like they don't need that salary cap flexibility that year. They don't need to exercise it. Well, if you don't exercise an option, let's say the option was for 2030, and we can see the Eagles have, $29.8 million sitting there in 2030, 19.8 in 2031, or whatever year that's for. I'm not even certain which year. That they're attributed to. All this money then would accelerate onto your current cap. So if you didn't exercise the option, um, cap in those years that you're now opting out of, you're declining, that stuff would accelerate back onto your current cap. So you don't want to necessarily do that too. So it's just little kind of salary cap rules, and you're just trying to again give yourself the most flexibility for extending a contract or doing whatever. Um, with that deal to make it work for you. All right, Cameron has a question here. Let's see. In the 2023 NFL Draft, we watched the Bears first sell the first overall pick on additional draft capital and a proven wide receiver. Instead of doubling down and finding a long-term answer quarterback, seems like front offices are afraid to bring in multiple first-round quarterbacks if the guy from the previous year is still on his rookie deal. Do you think this type of approach is the biggest miscalculation? Yeah, I do. I think that it's obviously the case. I think that we live a in a world where, for whatever reason, the general managers have not moved past the fact that the money in the contracts now allows you to have multiple quarterbacks as first round picks. In the past, it didn't. The way the contracts were structured, um, one of the players at least, if he got playing time, was going to make a ridiculous amount of money. And the second player was going to make a pretty good amount of money too, and would throw an absolute fit if he didn't play, because that player wouldn't be able to unlock the money. So let's just say, for example, the Bears had, years ago, like a really good young player possibly under contract, in the old system. Let's say that they drafted Carson Palmer, And then the next year they were pretty bad, and they said, oh, well, we want to draft Eli Manning too. Eli Manning's agent would say he will never, ever, 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 ever play for the Chicago Bears. Okay, well, then we'll draft Phillip Rivers. Phillip Rivers' agent would say the exact same thing. Why? Because if they don't get that opportunity to play, they wouldn't unlock the money in their contract. It would never come out. Now, all the contracts are the same. So you're just looking for your opportunity to play. And, while you wouldn't be happy about it, you're going to have an open competition. And the thing is, once a player hits, you're going to get traded. And you're going to have an opportunity with another team, to go out there and do well. So I think that's a big whiff by all these teams. It's cheap. There's no reason to not have it. Every team needs a backup. It's cheap even for a backup. If the player actually is good, it's a reasonable cost for a backup. And if the quarterback doesn't have the mental makeup to deal with competition from another young player on the team, they don't have the makeup necessary to win a championship for you either. So, to think that, player development is going to be stunted, that they're going to be hurt by the pressure that comes from a competition. I mean, it's nonsense. Yeah, it's true. There's not enough reps to go around in the preseason and everything else anymore. But you know what? You work with these guys. You've got all off season to learn and work with them and everything else. And yeah, it's a massive mistake by teams to continue to chase these young quarterbacks for 2, 3, 4 years and then say, okay, now we've got to make a switch when you had ample possibilities. How could you be the Jets with Christian Hackenberg on your roster and bypass on a quarterback in the next draft because you're hopeful he'll play? It doesn't make any sense. And you would think that people would look at Arizona and what they did. And I know that Kyler Murray right now is looked at maybe as not a positive. But, he got that coach and that general manager a couple of years, got them more money. An exciting young player. And their other option would have been to sit with Josh Rosen. Like, how bad would that have been? So, you think that would be an example people look at, but for some reason they don't. Let's see. Eamon? I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right here. Let's see. Patriots fan. Oh, boo. That's right. But it also says he likes the podcast, so that's very good. Thank you. Interested by your assertion that the Bears should think about taking 2 quarterbacks. Oh, same kind of topic, I guess. 2 QBs from picks 1 and 2 in the hypothetical they have at the season's end. Isn't there an opportunity cost related to not picking a wide receiver or offensive tackle that would make it more likely for both quarterbacks to fail for lack of help? Seems like it put both in a bad situation. When in contrast, you could put one in a position to do well with premier talent besides him. So, you can argue that. You mentioned here Bradford, Darnold, David Carr is not having, good supporting cast around him. So there's a couple of things here. Number one, usually the quarterback elevates the players. And I know I've talked about Joe Burrow before and kind of say that I think Joe Burrow kind of fits a little bit more in that category where having those players, I think, has increased his stock. I'm not sure if he would be there as much without some of those guys around him, but I don't think he'd be bad by any stretch. You have an ability to make teams, passable around you. So, yeah, the Bears are a bad football team, right? The Bears had $100 million in cap room to use last year. They have $100 million next year to use in cap room. Now, free agency sucks compared to what it used to be. That's true. But you can still find players. And when you're a really bad team, even just getting incremental gains is going to help you out. Going out there and finding a professional wide receiver, going out there and finding a professional left tackle, Doesn't have to be the greatest left tackle in the world. Doesn't have to be the greatest wide receiver in the world. He doesn't have to be Justin Jefferson. Um, but the other thing is when you go to all these other positions, even though you do have the ability to draft a stud, I know Houston would be an example of this from this year now, that different positions, obviously, but, where you got 2 high picks. There's no guarantee that player, just because he's a stud, works out. Right? The draft is littered with busts. The success rate on your top 10 is, probably about 50%, maybe 55. So, it's there's not that kind of chance. The odds aren't in your favor. Let's put it this way: if you select quarterback, wide receiver, the odds are probably not in your favor that the quarterback is good and the wide receiver is good. The odds probably work against you for that. So while it looks great, and people will say it all the time when you get these drafts and that's done this. A bad player is just a bad player sometimes. Garrett Wilson's a terrific rookie. That didn't salvage Zach Wilson last year. The players you bring in, yeah, you don't want to have a team of junk. That's for certain. But it's not like it's not a lock at those other positions either. Now offensive linemen usually do a little bit better. They're a little bit easier, I think, a lot of times to project out if you want to do something like that. But there's reasonable talent that you can find. Certainly interior line through free agency. A tackle, that's a little bit harder. But again, usually it's not like your jailbreak stuff that's going to happen, to where your guys are that bad, to where it's just like they're teeing off, the way they did on Carr years ago. That was a different league, different time. But, I think my argument on it is if I have a 50% chance of getting it right on the quarterback, I'd rather up my chances of getting it right on the quarterback by having two shots at it than I would by hoping that the quarterback and the wide receiver hits, or the quarterback and the left tackle hits. Because if the quarterback doesn't hit, those are wasted picks. And if those players hit, but or if those players don't hit, it's like, well, I didn't really gain anything anyway. My focus was all on my quarterback at that point. So I think that's kind of the way that I would look at that. Second part of the question: what trade compensation would someone get for a top 2 quarterback that didn't play? I guess I'm not convinced by your assertion that they would receive the value of the second overall pick. I think the player would depreciate by not playing. Might get a first round pick, but probably a later one, losing significant value in the process. So yeah, that part's true. You're not going to get if you picked a player number 2, you're probably not going to get the number 2 pick back for that player. I think if the player sits, I think you're right. You would get a 1. It just depends on where that 1 would be. I don't think it has to be a late 1. I think if it was a late number 1, I think you'd be able to get more than that. Probably like a 1 and a 3 or something. Now we're talking about a player that doesn't play. If a player plays and he sucks, that's different. Josh Rosen got a 2, I think it was, and you probably couldn't have a worse rookie year than him. So that would probably be the worst that you could get for a player. But yeah, you might lose something in the process. Depends on how good of a sales job that you can do. One of the things that makes those trades very beneficial is you've prepaid the contract, right? You've paid the signing bonus on the contract. So if you still believe strongly in that player is very talented, you should be able to recover something. So, some of it might depend on the drafts too. Is it a good year for quarterbacks, bad year for quarterbacks? If you have a year where it's a bad year for quarterbacks in the draft and you have quarterback needy teams, those teams might be willing to move those higher picks, a higher pick to bring the player in. I think that's how it would work. And, you would gauge you'd also be able to gauge the market probably of those players. Guys a second overall pick, still second overall pick. If somebody was trading into that spot for a chance to bring in that player from day one, let's say they gave up 2 number 1s to get that player in. I can't see why you still wouldn't do it because if you can create a market for it, you just say, well, we're going to keep the player here. We want him as a backup, and that's the other thing is there's really nothing wrong with having him as a backup. He's a good player, have him as a backup. And then, you can see, and yeah, that's is a great use, to have a backup, with a number 2 overall pick. Probably not the greatest of use, but if he had to play, and again the odds are against both guys being good, but let's say he did have to come in because of injury. I would rather have that as my backup than the Colt McCoys and the Brian Hoyers of the world, where there's a very 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 low ceiling, to what you can get out of those players. At least you've got potential for some kind of higher end play maybe out of those players. But those are fair arguments that you can say that the number 2 pick is worth more. That we're wasting a 2 and all we're going to get back in return is maybe a 15. And that we're not going to get more than that. But I always look at it too, like teams get desperate for players. Denver with Russell Wilson, that's a good example. Obviously very different situations with what you would expect with the who those players are, versus a rookie with no playing time. But teams get desperate and they make big moves, for players who sometimes haven't really been that great, but sometimes you do need some playing time to be in there. And the other thing too is you can showcase players in the preseason. Matt Schaub, I forget. I'm sure they recovered probably whatever they spent on him. A lot of that came from being a preseason player. That helped him out a little bit. Jimmy Garoppolo was 4 games, and they recovered their number 2, I guess, for him. So I think there's ways to do that kind of stuff. Okay, let's move on to the Twitter side of it. Let's see what we got here. Okay, only a couple here, which is good. All right. New York Rangers news. Will the Jets truly stick with Zach Wilson all season? I don't think they have any other options right now. I think their options ran out a while ago on that. So, they were hopeful with the game against the Chiefs. It was the best game he had in some time. And, actually played pretty well. Denver, it was kind of back to, he wasn't atrocious. And the turnover really wasn't his fault. But, just some dumb stuff. You blow a field goal and, field goal attempt with just stupid decisions and, some passes that were all over the place. And you can see again, the Jets fall into this trap with him where I think they look at Wilson as like, okay, we'll give him an opportunity, and the minute he does something that we don't like, they're like a maybe it's a dropped interception or just a really bad read, we'll move off him and we're only going to let him throw if it's 3rd and long. And I think that's what you saw a lot in that game, especially in the red zone. It was like, don't let the kid make a mistake. Don't let the kid make a mistake. Don't let the kid make a mistake. And it's like you're never going to score that way. You're not. And that's what they did. Now, to their credit, they won that game. But I think people came out of that game again with kind of the whatever with Wilson. But yeah, I don't think they have any other real options right now to do something else. Jacob, what kind of contract would you give Brian Burns? I don't know. They should have traded him last year. He's probably going to end up in this, $25 million a year range. Um, that's probably where he'll end up being. Brian, want a free ticket to the Jets game tomorrow? No, definitely don't want to be outside all day tomorrow. It's outside enough today. Just barely getting by with that. But thank you. Thrush, not sure about the money payment dates, but odds. JT gets traded, cut next year. The Colts didn't want to pay him a month ago. Those feelings probably didn't just go away. Seems like it'd be a situation where they pay him $20 million for a dozen games. I still can't understand that contract at all. You have the numbers up here. I can't imagine they would cut him next year, but I do think you're right. That it's just like a waste of a contract here. Um, so, I guess there's a possibility they could still trade him next year. That'd be about looks like 7.7 million dead. If they were to do that. So, and maybe you do something along those lines. Yeah, it's just such a stupid deal. It's just a terrible job. They blame it on the owner. I don't blame it on the GM. Um, and then you see Moss go off in that game. It's like, yeah, we really needed the more expensive guy, right? All right. Anyway, Jake, where does coaching give you an edge, and what do you look for to discern the competent versus non-competent? So, um, if you want to see the incompetent coaching, I think number one, you start looking for things that you can control that you're screwing up. Um, you know, 12 men on the field, constant kind of like procedural penalties, um, awful clock management, misuse of timeouts and challenges, um, personnel mishaps, not being prepared for fourth down decisions and wasting timeouts in those spots. Um, I think those are kind of things that you look at, like the end of game situation with Zach Wilson this past week. I'm sorry, end of half. Like that very clearly is a poor coaching job as well. That's a not ready for prime time coaching job. That's what that was. Um, where you look at stuff like that. I mean, where you're talking about completely incompetent, I think that's really where you start to look at, players revolting, like what you saw in Detroit, a couple of years ago, where, you can't even manage your own group of players. Like you're not even getting anything out of those players. Um, I think Adam Gase fit into that category at the end in New York. I think those are kind of things that you would look at a little bit. But I think just as a baseline, um, it's those little things like that you're just not prepared for it, and it's like the games get to the point where it's like you're in a panic mode, trying to finish out a game, and then you have other teams that are just very cool, calm, and collected, and it's like, I've been here, done that, and there's never a worry about it. And I think that's just like a big thing. But coaching in general, I think gives you an edge. It's your decision making, the way you're planning your in-game strategies, the way that you're approaching the game as a um, sprint versus marathon kind of stuff. Um, that you're looking at these things as, every possession is important, every possession is a little battle, versus some of the other coaches that are much more still in this, like you're playing field position battles, and it's like that doesn't work against 80% of the teams in the league anymore. Um, but I think that's all a big thing. And obviously one of the things you look for too is the success of teams. Um, over time, the couple of coaches, like Tomlin's a great coach. Nobody ever mentions about him being a great coach, and yeah, he does some stuff that doesn't fit in the mold of some of the other guys. But year in and year out, he very clearly has those teams ready to play, and they do better than they probably should. Um, the Ravens just need to find somebody to scout wide receivers. This has been going on for like 20 years with them. I don't know what they do. Good organization. They have no clue with the receivers. Never have. $15 million to Odell Beckham. Lunacy. All right, Dave, with Dak, Micah, and CeeDee Lamb will do for extensions after the year following Diggs and Steele. What type of flexibility does that leave Dallas after all these deals are done? Do they have too much talent to justify a move off of Dak to reset and go cheap at quarterback? Dak's contract is hard to move off of. Um, I said everybody, there's always ways to do stuff. His contract is probably at the point almost of no return. Let me pull up Prescott's deal. So Dak's contract for next year is the last year of his contract. He's got a $59.5 million cap hit. At the moment, his contract is set to void in 2025. When his contract voids, it'll leave them with a $36.4 million cap hit. But it's going to be more than that because they're not going to be able to handle probably a $59 million cap charge next year. So, they're probably going to have to defer some of that cost to the following year. I don't know by how much. But that 36 million might grow to 46 million, 50 million, and you don't have another option on your team because Dallas has done a very poor job in planning for any kind of possibility of, ever having to replace Dak, I think. So I would look at it as almost like they're stuck with each other. That it's the way that it was structured. It's just the way that it's going to be. They're not in a situation where they have another player they can turn to. They don't have a younger guy they could bring in. They don't have a younger guy they're going to be in a position to draft. So I think this is one of those where you probably do a 3-year extension with him and, plan those exit strategies for when he's 33, 34, 35 years old. And see if you can get any further with him. And obviously, it's coming off the catastrophe kind of week. But yeah, I think I don't think it's that you have too much talent to justify the move off him. I think it's you're just not in a position draft wise to be able to bring somebody in. I think that's really more the issue. Like you need to be in a position to find another quarterback. Like bringing in, for example, Kirk Cousins. First of all, he'd have $62 million dead next year, and that'd be pretty tough to handle. With Cousins on top of that, like Prescott's younger than Cousins. There's really not a lot of difference, I think, with your ceiling with those players. So it's like, who would you bring in? Baker Mayfield, Jameis Winston? I mean, you're not going to be better, with those players, and you're still probably not going to be bad enough to be in a spot to draft a quarterback. So, if Dallas was going to move on from Dak, the way they would have to do it would probably be to not touch his contract next year. Let things just play out as they will with the cap. And if there's a quarterback that they like this year, you have to be aggressive. Probably trade your number one from 2025 into 2024 to bring a player in. This would be similar to, what the Chiefs did with Mahomes, like how they got him. It would have to be that kind of move to where you would have somebody sit behind Dak the next year and say, you've always wanted to go to free agency. We're going to give you that chance to go to free agency. And, you have the young guy waiting in the wings to kind of take over. So, I could see that maybe being a way they can do it. But I don't know. I don't that doesn't seem like a Dallas move to me. Um, so I just think it's hard for them to do it because it's and again, it's not the too much talent thing because I think if you got a player that has more upside, while you might sacrifice 2024, you guys are still probably young enough for 2025 to be meaningful. Um, and if the young player hits, he's going to give you more than Prescott will at this stage of his career. Um, I just don't see that as a Dallas move, and the Dak contract is just it's not really structured great. Canes, Miles Sanders has been a total failure so far for Carolina. Should they just cut him next season or restructure to reduce the damages? Has he been that bad? Let me see. What's the Panthers cap next year? It can't be too bad. 63, 50 million effective. Let's look at Miles Sanders. It is a deal that didn't make sense. Um, you know, as you know, it's just they're not in that position. Do they really need him? No. So he has six guaranteed. He's got a 7-7 cap hit. So they don't need to restructure it. I mean, this is basically one of those where you're just going to have somebody on the team, and he's probably not going to play a bunch. Um, you're probably going to have him there. I mean, you could bite the bullet and just cut outright, but I think more likely this would be a scenario where you just go in there and just eat it, and you hear a lot of articles about how he was nicked up and he's in the best shape of his career, blah 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 blah, and you get the same results. But I think the numbers are low enough to where you just deal with it next year and then you move on the year after that. Robert, can the Jets trade their first round pick given that it's not possible for Rodgers to meet the condition, or is it tied up? So I think the pick itself is tied up. I thought they could include it as a conditional pick, but I'm not sure. Nick brought up a good example of the NFL not allowing you to do that with the compensatories. So this, I could see a way that this would be the same thing. Though I don't know. I kind of feel like you can structure something um, in a way. Excuse me. uh, you should be able to structure something in a way to where it's like a big what if kind of book. The old books if you were a kid, and you turn to page 3 if you choose this, turn to page 5 if you do this. Like you're giving a baseline 2024 or 2025 first round pick, but it can be the 2024 first round pick if the Jets have one. Like I don't see why that would be against some kind of rules. Um, I'm pretty sure they've done trades in the past where you get say a second round pick and then the team gets a conditional for a first round pick the next year. Now the thing's not locked up, but it's one of those to where okay, we gave you the second, now you qualify for the first, so you're going to give us a second back. Um, and they allow that, so or at least they used to. So I would think there's a way that you can structure a trade to do that, but I don't think that you can just say like it's for the 2024 number one. I think it would have to be a conditional. All right, I think this is the last question. Gary, should Denver sit Wilson to avoid the injury guarantee? Absolutely. You know, I think the main thing is, again, um, you're talking to him to get him to waive that guarantee to, help his own situation out and help him out. Um, and what should I read here? Something on Jonathan Taylor, I guess. I have no idea. Anyway, um, the thing. Oh, wait, it's an ESPN article. Let's see what ESPN had to say. Yeah, I'll read this later. I didn't really even see this one. It's a terrible deal. I don't know. The Colts are stupid. Anyway, uh, um, where was I at with these conditionals or whatever? So yeah, I'm pretty sure that they could probably work something out there if they needed to. But I don't think there's anything the Jets are going to trade for. All right, so I think that does it for me. Hopefully, this didn't sound too terrible. Um, I was able to keep from just hacking up the whole time, so that's good. So hopefully, I'll be back next week. If you have any other follow-up questions to Wilson, that's what it was. Someone was asking about the injury guarantee. Um, you have any follow-up questions, feel free to ask. I'll try to answer them on Twitter or in the comments on YouTube or something like that, or email, if you need to. So otherwise, everybody have a great week. Hopefully the Jets will pull off an upset tomorrow. Sorry, Eagles fans. But see how that goes. So everybody have a great week, and I'll talk to you all again soon.